Hello everyone, it's Mark Goodacre here. Welcome to the NT Pod, the podcast all about the New Testament and Christian origins. It's episode 101, and today I'm in conversation with Matthew Page. Matthew Page is an expert on the Bible in film, and he's run a Bible Films blog for some years. And his new book, 100 Bible Films, is now out, and I sat down with Matthew to have a conversation about it. I hope you enjoy it. So, a very warm welcome, Matt, to the NT Pod. Absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Well, it's very exciting for me to be here because I think I've listened to almost all of the kind of 99 episodes. Is this the 99th?
This will be episode 101.
101.
Because there's a couple in the can that I'm going to release over the next week or so.
Right, okay. So yeah, but I think I've listened to almost all of those except for one of the Indian when you were in India.
Oh
the Thomas special ones.
Yeah.
I think I've listened to every other one except.
That's very nice of you.
So it's really nice for me to actually be on one myself. So.
Well, it's frustrating really for me that I've done so few of them recently because I really enjoy the podcast and I really enjoyed starting in one or two episodes which are broader conversations so that listeners don't just have to be listening to my voice all the time. So I'm really delighted that you could join us. I mean, we've known each other now for some years, haven't we? I mean, we must known each other for at least 15 or 20 years, I think.
Yeah, I think it's about 20. From my memory, I think it was around 2001-ish, because that was when I first started getting into this. And back in those days, there wasn't very much on the web about it, but you had your NT Gateway site up, and so you had the celluloid crisis page up there. So that was a great resource for me, and I think I remember contacting you fairly early on. And you replying, which was astonishing, I think, at the time.
That's good to hear.
It's kind of in those days when the internet was, this kind of unknown thing, and it had such possibility. And
one of the first things that I did on my NT, it wasn't called the NT Gateway at the time, but one of the first things that I did on the site was put a page up on Jesus films, and that was because there was so little out there, like you say. And when did you begin your Bible Films blog then, Matt? When does that date from?
That was kind of 2006. So so there was a program in 2005. Well, it actually aired in Easter 2006. It was called with Robert Beckford, who was he a colleague of yours at one stage?
Yes, he was. We were colleagues at the University of Birmingham together.
Called the Bible Films Faith and Fury.
Yes,
the Passion Films Faith and Fury.
Yes,
and I was interviewed as part of that. I was one of the kind of talking heads.
That's right.
Of that.
You were on that. Yes.
So I kind of thought, well, maybe now's a good time to actually do something with this. And there was, I was writing quite a bit. In random places, and I just thought it was maybe time to just focus on it. So I started that at the start of 2006. So that's
it's an absolutely fantastic resource, the Bible Films blog, and it's been a complete go-to for me across the years. And in fact, I teach a course here at Duke on Jesus in film, and constantly I'm sending students over to the Bible Films blog, but not just that, I have to go there as well just to remind myself about things. And I've learnt a huge amount. Like, for example, one of the films that we covered in my most recent iteration of the course is a film, and I should have done my homework and looked it up first because it's got a long Indian name. What's the name of that?
Karuna Mayhew.
Yes, that's right. And that is an absolutely amazing piece of work. And I became very conscious in the most recent time I taught Jesus in film that one of the issues is they're so predominantly white, European / American. At
Yeah.
least those films that are part of that kind of, even the scholars canon of films. And I just realized that, just having like a bit of tokenism and putting in like a couple of Jesus films like Son of Man in there really isn't good enough. And your blog was a fantastic resource for me just to kind of shake myself out of that just sort of utterly whitewashed Jesus that we have
Yeah.
in these films.
Yeah, and that was something I really wanted to kind of bring out in the book a bit more. I wanted to kind of push the envelope in terms of that. I mean, still I think it's around 50% of the films, depending quite how you count it, are still kind of from the US. Um, but but and there are a lot of them, but I thought it was really important actually to kind of tell this as a kind of world story. It's a story that is known in so many different parts of the world, and I thought that was really important to go for that really, and to try and kind of promote films that perhaps don't, as you say, don't normally get a look in and aren't in that kind of the core group of films that get talked about.
Right.
Because I think you just get such a different perspective on the stories, and that's one of the things that's very interesting about it, is that when you watch Bible films, they force you to look at stories that people often know and are just so over familiar with. They've heard them so many times. If people go to church, they hear them on a regular basis there, and if they're studying, they kind of are maybe looking again and again at a passage. And I think one of the things it's really good at is it forces you to look at it from someone else's perspective, and not a perspective you would ever have come from necessarily. And so that was it. That was a key thing I wanted to bring out in the book. And I think there's kind of 30 odd countries that have been that have had at least part of a contribution to it, and 6 continents.
Cool. Yeah, I thought one of the things that you brought out really well in the book was just the sheer range of different Jesus films, both in terms of the history. So we're going back to the late 19th century, all the way into the early 21st century, but also geographically and in terms of style. And even, although it might sound a bit odd, but even different kind of genres, because there's a world of difference between an early silent Jesus film or Bible film and and something like Gibson's Passion of the Christ. I mean, they're almost like different creatures.
Yeah, I mean, even within the silent era. So I think I covered 19 films from the silent era, which is a period of 30 years. I think people often forget just how long that time was.
Yeah.
But even the difference between the films at the very start of that, and even even a few years into that time, and the kind of just before the talkies period is also very, very different. And in some ways, something like DeMille's King of Kings from 1920 has got more in common with the Passion of the Christ than it maybe has with some of those very early films.
Yeah, true. Good point. I mean, so we have begun talking about the book. So let's let listeners know a little bit more about it. Now, this podcast is hopefully going to be going out in mid-May, so I think we can actually say the book is out now. But you can certainly order it already. And tell us about the book, and tell us about how it came about, and how long it's taken you to put this together.
Yeah. So. It's taken me a long time. I think sometime around 2009, I think it was, I went down to see something at the National Film Theatre in London, and the BFI has a big bookshop there, and they had a kind of series of these books called things like 100 American horror films, 100 Bollywood films, 100 westerns, that kind of thing. And I'd been doing the blog for about 4 years, and I'd done various other pieces of writing as well. I was writing for a site called Read Jesus at that point, and I'd done quite a bit for them.
Yeah.
And I thought, I just thought, it just grabbed me as a really good idea to do 100 Bible films, and I kind of naively thought I can pull together some of those pieces I've written and give them a tidy up, and it would be quite a good way to do that. But it has taken me about 12, 13, 14 years to get from that point to this point.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, partly because I'm kind of not within academia, so it's it's done around weekends, evenings, mornings, holidays, etc. And partly just because actually those blog pieces are very kind of different from each other, and a lot of them are too long for this book. So this book I had to kind of like really bring things down, which really I think really improved the writing. I kind of feel I'm a bit stuck now because I don't think I'll be able to ever write a book a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also the kind of it's a bit of a moving target. So the kind of probably the 100 films I was thinking of when I first had the idea was quite different from the 100 films we've ended up with, as my kind of understanding has got broader, and what else is the films I've known about has got broader. Obviously even within that period there's been another 20, 30 films to add to the list. So yeah, so it's been a very long journey really, but I think if I'd written that book within kind of 2 or 3 to 5 years of when I first had the idea, I think it would have been rubbish. Whereas,
right. Did you? Well, I'm happy to say to listeners, I've read the whole thing, and I was very privileged to get an early look at it, and I think it's outstanding. I think it's going to be a really, really great resource. In fact, I have very happy memories of reading it because I was actually quarantining in the Netherlands at the time, and one of the things about the pandemic is that it's given us a lot more time indoors than we used to have, and especially if you're quarantining. And so I actually had the chance just to sort of maraud my way through the manuscript. I really, really enjoyed it. And the thing that I kept finding myself saying all the way through is I am getting educated reading this. But also, even though I did read it from beginning to end, it's the kind of thing that people could just dip into easily, isn't it? They might just say, oh, well, pull it off the shelf and say, well, something comes on TV. King of Kings comes on TV. Oh, let's see what Matt says about that. You pull the book off the shelf, you check it out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean I've got quite a lot of the books in that series for precisely that reason, really, because I just love watch something, have a quick read about it afterwards, and kind of I kind of like that. And actually, one of the other books aside from that series that inspired it is Roger Ebert has done he did a book called The Great Movies, and that was 100 films in that way. And I don't think I've read it from cover to cover yet, but I've kind of almost. I mean, I enjoy reading that book so much that I kind of I go out and track those films down so that I can have the pleasure of reading them afterwards, even if I don't enjoy the film. But yeah, so I quite often access that kind of book that way, and have read a short bit straight afterwards. Yeah, short's maybe not quite the right word, but the chapters are all about 600, 700 words each, so it's but quite dense, I think. Yeah, so as you say, you can read it all the way through, and it's ordered historically, so it's kind of telling this story of the evolution of that. But you can also, as you say, just kind of dip into it as you watch them and come across them.
Now, the manuscript that I saw obviously was like your type, your kind of word process stuff. But
yeah.
Is it going to have pictures in it?
It is, yeah. I'm really excited about this part of it as well, actually, because one of the advantages of doing it with the BFI, the British Film Institute, is that they have their own kind of archive of photos that I was able to get access to, and I was really lucky to work with a couple of a great couple of people on kind of pulling it together in terms of doing the visual design.
Excellent.
And so we were able to get an image for every film,
Fantastic.
Which took a bit of ingenuity and a bit of a challenge in places, and obviously some of those ones that are very obscure and very early, the quality is not quite the same as some of the more recent efforts. But yeah, it was really I was really lucky to have such a great team working together on it, and I think
great.
yeah. So
are there issues with rights as well with pictures? I mean, for the ones that are sort of well out of copyright, I suppose you're okay. But what do you do for things like recent stuff?
Well, with the recent, I mean, again, it depends a little bit on where. So some of the stuff that's in the archive, the BFI hold the rights to anyway.
Oh, okay.
And then a lot of it is based on kind of fair use So if it's relevant
Cool.
to what I'm actually discussing, and it's done in Scottish, I can't remember quite all the criteria on that, but and so there's quite so some of them are posed stills. I think there's at least one that is a publicity issue, and then a lot of them are kind of carefully selected actual screenshots from the film that
Okay,
kind of
fantastic.
have a relevant thing.
Oh, that makes sense.
So yeah, so it is so one of the things that was exciting for me in the process, I think, was around the time we started looking at the photos, I happened to order one of these books off the web because they changed the style partway through. So they were quite a small book initially, but then changed it so it's kind of square A4 width, if you see what I mean. So it's yeah, so it's quite a nice sized book, and with the images on each page, and they're all kind of laid out as double page spreads. So I think and it just made me get really excited that it's just going to look really nice as a
Yeah.
kind of as an object. I mean, I imagine you're like me in that books have a special place anyway, and
Yes.
I love the aesthetics of books anyway, and obviously with it
Yes.
being a kind of British Film Institute book, it's particularly needs to obviously the kind of people that come approaching this from the kind of film side of things have a particular love of aesthetics as well, and so yeah, so I haven't seen a printed copy yet, but I'm
Hmm.
really looking forward to it because I know, having looked at this other one in the series, that it will be a really nice, and knowing the images, that it will be a really nice object in itself, even if you think the words are rubbish, then
Yeah. Well,
it'll look pretty.
which they're not. They go. But it looks square. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it is square. Yeah, so
Okay.
it's the kind of so it's the width of it's the width and the height of A4 width, which
Fabulous. Okay.
I've just remembered you don't have A4 in America, do you? But
That's right.
it's probably slightly smaller than
Letter
full square.
size. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
letter size is which isn't quite the same as A4, but
No, near
it's the
enough. Yeah,
closest equivalent.
yeah.
Fantastic. So the thing we've already alluded to this a little bit, but the thing that I think I would really struggle with would be, in even getting the thing started, would be which ones to include and which to exclude, and on a not on a sort of analogous thing. When I'm putting my Jesus in Film course together, I spend literally hours trying to work out what I can get rid of. I've got about 50 films that I want the students to watch, and obviously I'm not going to
Yeah.
make them watch 50 films in
No,
in a kind of 10 to 15 week course.
no. Any more than
And
45 would be cruel, wouldn't it?
so I spent ages obsessing about, and then my hand like hovers over the word processor as I delete something like the Visual Bible Gospel of John,
Yeah.
which I kind of love and I really want them to watch, and I just go over and over again on what I can and what I can cut, and of course as time goes on that becomes more and more of an issue because more films keep coming out.
Yeah, yeah.
And also you want some recency factor, so you do want some recent stuff. You don't want it all to be like stopping in 1973 or something. So
Yeah.
I mean, how did you navigate your way around that? I mean, did you have to sort of keep cutting and adding and
definitely.
cutting? I mean, there must have been some on the sort of equivalent of the editing floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did a count at once, and I think there are at least something like 30 to 40 other films that at some
Wow.
stage have been in the frame and
Wow.
were then moved out of it. To the point that, part of me thinks maybe in a few years you could do a second, but which would be quite an interesting book because it would have all the canon, would kind of all the ones that people always talk about were out the way, and you'd just be looking at anyway.
Yeah, I think I like that
Not yet,
idea.
but
Yeah.
yeah, well, maybe
A bit
we'll
like
see.
having, it always amuses me that they brought out ABBA Gold in the early 90s, and then it
Yeah.
was so successful that they brought out more ABBA Gold a couple of years later.
I know.
Which
That's the thing. It will
is
become
quite,
slightly farcical, but
yeah, it's kind of,
um,
so yeah, you should 100 more Bible films. I mean,
yeah,
seriously, I think that's a great idea.
yeah. I mean,
there was
I think the ideas really helped in terms of that thing of, it's made it easier to cut them. To think, well, maybe maybe in the future, I do think it would be an interesting thing from a kind of academic angle because there's a lot of books, as you say, that cover the same films. And that was, I guess, partly that was in my mind was that certain films probably need to be in there just because everyone else talks about them, and
Yeah.
it's weird not to do that. But whereas a different, but I mean, I kind of feel like I'm talking about a book I haven't even written yet. But it's but the thing would be interesting about that would be all those main films would be gone, and it would be kind of these more obscure films that kind of go into the more interest, the more obscure places and the more
Yeah.
kind of the kind of off the beaten track kind of thing. So it would be a different audience. But I think particularly for that the kind of people that engage in the SBL Bible on film track, for example, it might be quite an interesting piece because a lot of the films haven't been written by people much, or maybe only one person has written
Right.
them.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, one of the things that I do find frustrating about the study of Bible films is that there is a kind of canon, and there are all sorts of problems with the canon. One we've already mentioned is that it's a very white American/European kind of canon, for one
Yeah,
thing. But I think one of the other issues is it's that whole thing of, to the one who has more will be given, and the one that has not, even what they have will be taken away. In the sense
yeah,
that there are certain films that just get kind of pushed down and pushed down and pushed down to the point where they actually become quite obscure for no other reason than that just people aren't talking about them, and they're not adventurous enough, or they haven't got enough intellectual curiosities to seek them out.
yeah, very much so. And I think also, I mean, another of those problems is that you end up with there's kind of an evolving genre there as well. And so people quite often, when they think about Bible films, they think about DeMille, they think about the Ten Commandments, if they're thinking old Hebrew Bible, they think about Greatest Story Ever Told, or maybe the Passion of the Christ if they're thinking more recent than that. But those things become so infused within the culture that they naturally there's naturally they kind of influence the films that come
Yeah,
after them,
that's right.
even if not intentionally. And I think one of the interesting things about dealing with some of these other films is they come from other places, is that they take sometimes take a totally different approach to things, and move away from it being a kind of neo biblical epics to quite different things. And there are American filmmakers that have done that as well. And so it was interesting writing about those as well. But it was it took me a while to kind of realize that was where I needed to go with the book, and going back to what we were saying about having to get rid of films and those
Yeah.
kind of difficult decisions. That was a difficult stage, because I kind of thought, actually I need to really go for this and find a bunch, some more films here that I haven't considered. So this was when after I'd got the initial contract through, but before submitting the final
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
So then I had I had to find, I think I'd brought in another 10 films that were more diverse, and so then I had to kind of get rid of another 10. And
Yeah.
that process really was, I mean, I've really tried hard to balance the films in the book, because I wanted this historical spread. So again, I think quite often, books about film history, or books about collections of film generally, tend to really cheat the silent era. I always feel they kind of
Yeah.
often
Yeah.
feel, if you get one in from the silent era, then you can tick that box.
Yeah.
And it is, it's a quarter of it's a quarter of film history.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it hasn't quite got parity with the newest films. So the kind of the silent era is the most sparse, as I say. I think there's 19 films out of that 30-year period, and the last decade is the most covered.
What's the most what's the most recent film that's in the book?
There's two films from 2020. So there's one of which is a film from the Netherlands called Lamentations of Judas,
Right.
which is a really interesting film, because it's part kind of acted out Jesus play, and it's part documentary, and basically it's the story. It's by a Dutch filmmaker, but it's actually all shot within the kind of South Africa Angola border, or that kind of stretch there. And it basically, the director Boris Herretz worked with a group of soldiers. I think they were Angolan soldiers who had been kind of like forced into fighting on one side within the civil war, and then had been brought into South Africa to kind of enforce apartheid a little bit, but it was all kind of, it was a lot of it was forced labor or forced soldiering, I suppose. And then they were kind of left, and they ended up being this kind of despised people because they were hated by the South African nationals because they were brought in into oppressive role. They couldn't really go home, and so almost as a kind of therapeutic process, they started reenacting some of these, some of the stories from the Gospels and looking at the role of kind of Judas. So it's Lamentations of Judas, the title, and this idea slightly that, did Judas have to betray Jesus, become the kind of hated one, and what role he had in that, and also of the kind of the other soldiers and some of the other characters in the story. Were some of the soldiers in the story also kind of forced into that or not really have much say in that kind of thing? So it was a kind of really interesting mix of some of this kind of actual recorded footage, but also some of these one-to-one interviews with the cast effectively. So that was a kind of really profound film and a really interesting film. I would really hope it gets a bit more coverage.
Right. Yeah, I've not seen it, I must admit.
Yeah, well, it was a relatively light release, and this is slightly the problem with doing things so close to the date that you don't know what's going to be being released.
Yeah.
The other one from 2020 was a film called Assassin 33 AD.
Oh, yeah, I have seen that.
yeah. Which was also released again last year as Black Easter, and I think you discussed that with Laura Robinson, didn't you?
Yes, Laura Robinson and Ian Mills on their podcast. We had during the pandemic we did a joint episode, and I think Laura had just watched the film at that time. I hadn't seen it at that time, so I just loved hearing her. Even just listening to Laura describing what happens in the film, it sounds so completely bonkers. Oh, I forgot I got that in the book. That's great.
Yeah. It was one of those films that I saw it. I think I discovered it literally the same week that that you talked about. I think I found it.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And then your podcast with Laura and Ian came up, and it was like, it felt like it was meant to be. And I just felt I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was for the benefit of those that haven't seen it, it is. I don't know what is it in the so bad it's good category. Has it gone all the way around again to bad again?
I think it's, for me, it is in the so bad it's good category, or at least it's just it's the sheer audacity of what they're actually doing in this. I mean, to make a time travel movie about Jesus. It's just preposterous, but it's actually, I think it's fair to say it's entertaining, though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is entertaining. I don't think it's for the reasons that the filmmakers intended it to be.
No, I think that's probably right.
Because it's just so jaw dropping that it is a kind of entertainment form. And literally on Saturday I was talking to one of my friends about the book, and they were asking about it, and I told them about it, and they went home and downloaded it and watched it that evening, and were texting me about it the next day because it's a pretty unique film. So those were the two most recent ones. And I do feel they were both good ones to end on. Even though Lamentations of Judas has not yet found a kind of broader audience. The one that I probably would have included if everything had happened just a little bit later is The Chosen.
The Chosen, I was going to ask if you thought about that.
It was never quite. It was rising as I was going through the process, and so I think the final draft got submitted at the end of December 2020, and so at that stage it hadn't quite peaked, and I'd not been able to get hold of it initially, and there were kind of other things going on, and it was that kind of American Jesus film, and made by kind of fairly conservative Christians, and there have been a lot of those in the last 20 years. And so So yeah, and so it had so it kind of felt like the right decision then. Um, and then it kind of felt like once I submitted the final draft, then it just kind of like took off, and suddenly I could see it, and it all kind of it all went from there really. So there's a very brief
Hmm.
mention of it because I managed to get a mention in, but it
Oh, good.
never, yeah, it just kind of like it just kind of hit its
Hmm.
swell, just after I'd
Yeah,
kind of
I
was
mean,
done with it really.
for
So
listeners who are not familiar with The Chosen, I mean, one reason that you could easily have for not having included it, it's not finished yet.
well,
They're still
exactly,
making
yeah,
it.
yeah, and
I mean,
yeah, that's the
and so for I mean, you can't exactly have a second edition of a book which is 100 Bible
no.
films. So I think this definitely has to be in the sort of the more Bible films
Yeah,
second volume.
we'll put that in that in that
Yeah,
one.
when it, I mean, people that haven't seen it, I actually recommend it. It's a very moving film,
Mm,
or series of films, and it's in spite of its basic conservative backing and context and all the rest of it, it does take some real liberties in the sense that, I mean, the episode, I think it's either the third or the fourth episode, which is the one where Jesus spends time with children.
mm,
And there's really almost nothing in that episode from
no,
the Gospels. It's purely spun out of the imagination of the writers.
yeah,
I mean, it is adventurous. It's not, and one of the problems about very kind of conservatively inspired Jesus films is they're often very wooden because
mm,
they're trying so hard to be true to the text that they don't use their imaginations. But The Chosen isn't like that at all, is it?
yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, you might have seen more of it than I have because I tend to try and blog about things as I go along, um,
Right. Yeah.
because otherwise I find that if I don't watch it and then write about it, then I
Hmm.
feel like before I write about it, then I've got to watch it again and start over and
Yes.
pick things up. And there were probably really good things I thought of at the first time I watched it that
Yeah.
I've forgotten. I don't want to lose those. And
Mm.
so, and because I've been mainly kind of nose to the grindstone on the book for the last couple of years, I haven't really had much time to do that. So I'm only up to about episode 5 or 6. I think I've kind
Hmm.
of trying to get some thoughts down on episode 5, 6, the waters into wine one. Um,
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the things but yeah, it is a it is a fairly well realized version of Jesus, and I think it maybe.
Hmm.
And one of the, I mean, you mentioned the fact that it's not complete. And someone told me the other day that they think you're doing 8 series of it,
Wow.
and
Wow.
that I can't remember whether it's the end of series 2 or the end of series 3, and they've still only got to the end of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And I guess one
Yes.
of the things what I find really interesting about that, and this is conjecture because as I say, I haven't watched that much of it yet, is that you actually end up with a very small amount of gospel,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a considerable amount of this is what the filmmakers think Jesus is, and
Right.
there's always
Right.
that. That's always a payoff, but
Right.
it's interesting that it kind of it is kind of padding out all those stories with on such a big project with
Yeah.
such a degree of well this is what I think this is what
Mm.
I think
Mm.
Jesus is and stuff that is essentially I'm still trying to kind of think about what I think about that
Mm.
and perhaps it's put me slightly double standards because I'm quite happy with invention sometimes and something like for
Mm.
example Last Days in the Desert also not in the book um,
Mm.
I don't necessarily mind the kind of dramatic license and what if Jesus kind of approach, but I think for such a I don't know there's something about it being such a big project that I'm kind of intrigued by this thing of actually something that's got such a groundswell of support among Christians. I mean literally I mean
Mm.
the first few conversations I had telling people that I'd written the book when
Mm.
oh have you included The Chosen which
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
but something that's so popular,
Yeah.
being built so much on the imagination of a relatively small people, and and there are other sources, and it's about drama and so on. But it kind of feels a little bit like I'm not entirely comfortable with the degree to which the bits of the text are being kind of shaped around this broader
Mm.
pre-concept of who Jesus is and what would Jesus do kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
but
I think. I mean, for me, the jury's very much still out on it. I did include it as the very last piece on my last Jesus in Film course, but it was a little bit like your people. You know, the way you're saying that people came to you and said, "Are we going to do The Chosen?" There were two students in the class that said, "We just adore that." So I said, "Okay, I love it when students come to me with something they want to." And in fact, a couple of them had taken the course because they'd watched Chosen. Yeah. That's how much they loved it. There's two things that really I struggle with. One is I wish to goodness that they'd actually found a decent historical consultant, actually consulted an academic, because there are some really awful anachronisms in there which just jar for when I'm watching it. And the other thing is I'm so frustrated that we're back to the whole Mary Magdalene is a sex worker thing again. And I mean, this is probably a bit of a spoiler if you haven't got to these episodes yet, but basically that becomes clear in the second season,
right?
And the thing is that it really annoys me, that just because I feel like it's one of the things that we've actually made some real progress on, even to the point where in Killing Jesus, which is not one of my favourite Jesus films at all, but in Killing Jesus, there is a really brilliant moment where you've got Matthew the tax collector complaining about the way that people talk about him as a tax collector, and Mary Magdalene says, "You should hear some of the things they say about me." And I thought, oh, that's so good. I mean, that, you know, it's I love that line so much that you know that she inhabits in that moment 2,000 years worth of history. Well, not all, but you know, many hundred years worth of that history, and just with a knowing look, almost a knowing look at the camera, but not quite, you know.
Yeah.
And
winks to the camera.
Yeah, right. And then we go back to that. So. But I actually haven't got to those episodes yet. Anyway, I've just know that because I've had conversations with people about it. So I haven't done any of the second season at all yet, which I'm going to get around to at some point.
Yeah, so it's I mean, it's a very interesting project. It is a shame, I think, in some ways, that I wasn't able to include it. But as you say, if it's got 8 more, you know, if it's got 5 more seasons to go, then who knows what's going to happen?
No, right.
And you know, people do genuinely love it, and you know, and it does. I mean, there are some very bad film Jesus out there, aren't there?
There really are.
Let's be clear about this, and I don't think it slots into that category. I think it certainly has plenty to bring.
So one thing I do with my students for a bit of fun is you know, this is a not for credit exercise, but I actually always ask them what their least favorite film is of the ones that we've watched.
Yeah,
and there's but without telling you what they said to me last time, and bear in mind they haven't watched anywhere near the number of Jesus films that I have, let alone that you've watched. But what is your and I keep saying Jesus film because that tends to be more my, you know, that's the sort of, you know, parochial nature of a New Testament scholar. But what's your least favorite of the Bible films? That, I mean, is there one that you really dislike?
Yeah. There is.
And are you prepared to say which it is?
I dislike it so much that I felt I had to include it in the book. It is the German film from 1921 called Der Galiläer, or The Passion Play. And basically it was written in kind of interwar, produced within interwar Germany. I mean, you may be familiar with this as well, but when I was growing up, people quite often said, I heard people in church quite often say, when I think about Jesus, it's Robert Powell's face I see, because Jesus Nazareth 1927 was the film that was on telly and stuff, and I guess there's a lot of talk within Jesus film scholarship around anti-Semitism and the role of anti-Semitism, and I think we often think of that as, you know, as being a kind of thing way back in the past, and the Holocaust being way back in the past. But actually, it is. You know, it's still a very relatively new phenomenon. In terms of film history, it's something that happens about a third of the way into the history of film. It's, you know, it was something that kind of reached its peak after films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and Casablanca and Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz and all those films. it's a very, it's actually a very contemporary event, and I think we kind of
Yes.
forget that. And I watched this film, and I knew, I'd read about it in Adele Reinhardt's Jesus of Hollywood. So I kind of, I kind of knew it by reputation, but it was just, yeah, there is just a lot, it's just very anti-Semitic in terms of the way, particularly the way it portrays the crowd, and also the way it portrays Caiaphas and the other high priests. And it just really struck me, I think, when I watched it, that this was a film that contributed to that anti-Semitic atmosphere that was
Mm.
around it. It
Mm.
reflects it, but it also, also will have contributed to
Yeah.
it. And it did just make me think, just as like when I was growing up, people pictured Jesus, they thought about Jesus of Nazareth.
Mm.
If you were in Germany in the 30s and you were picturing Jesus and the events of what happened,
Mm. Mm.
were they picturing this film?
Right.
And
Right.
and what extent did this film that kind of shows this Jewish crowd kind of pressuring Caiaphas and rioting because he threatens to maybe not murder Jesus. That was kind of that contributed to that cultural atmosphere that
Mm.
we then obviously had such terrible consequences in the Holocaust. And so I kind of feel that it was it's a film that needs to be talked about in that context and
Yes. Yeah.
talked about as because I think when there was the talk about the Passion of the Christ,
Mm.
there was a lot of very dismissive attitudes to the question of anti-Semitism,
Mm.
which I think ran along the lines of well, God is a God of love. He obviously is against anti-Semitism. It obviously makes no sense. So it's just silly to kind of like go down this role. But actually, no, this is a modern era phenomenon. We've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
in the last decade, we've seen instances of anti-Semitism rise, both
Mm-hmm.
in America and in the UK. And actually, if we had a better understanding of the history of the Passion plays, like the one that's recorded in this film, and Bible Jesus films as a kind of extension of that tradition,
Mm.
then I think we would be, we really need to join the dots on it for people
Yeah. I
because
think that's right. You
because I
know.
think people don't realise the extent of the cultural assumptions they have taken on because that's been the way it's always been presented,
Right. Oh,
and that
very
some of
much
these
so.
things need to be undone, and people need to realise that. So that is my least
Yeah,
liked
that's
Jesus
fascinating.
film.
Do you know? It's funny because one of the things that really helped me to see how conscious lots of the decisions are
Mm,
in making films. So not long after the Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson film, there's a much
yeah,
less well-known Passion, which I always talk about just because I was a consultant on it.
yeah,
And what was
the BBC one.
fascinating, yeah, BBC, which I thought was brilliant, I must admit, I
Mm,
loved it. But one of the things that was fascinating about it was that the writer, Frank Deasy, constantly was talking about issues around the depiction of characters in the piece. And one of the
mm,
things that he was absolutely dead set on was Nigel Stafford Clark, the producer who was on board before Frank Deasy was. He said, "We do not want any cartoon caricature,
mm,
evil, baddie priests in this thing."
mm,
And he'd done his homework. He'd watched lots of this stuff. And Nigel Stafford Clark absolutely loathed the Gibson film.
mm,
And so it was actually, so just listening to the conversations and to some extent being part of the conversations myself, you actually get to realize how, I don't want to say how easy it is to make kind of good decisions, but at least how conscious you can be about them. Just as
yeah,
simple things like he said, okay, every Jesus film that he said that he knew of, you have Pilate having a wife because Matthew 27, we do have
mm,
Pilate's wife mentioned, and he said, well, we know that Caiaphas must have had a wife as well because we get the mention that Annas is his father-in-law. So he says, okay, let's give Caiaphas a wife and let's make her pregnant and let's see him as a
mm,
father figure. And then you watch the way that the character was created as a sympathetic character, as
mm,
somebody that you fully understood what's going on. In fact, in that film, Caiaphas is a much more empathetic character than Pilate is.
Yeah.
Pilate is played by James Nesbitt is a very
Full Belfast
scary
accent
and
on.
yeah. So that one helped me then to see in retrospect just how much a lot of what Gibson was doing would just have been pretty straightforward to change, and it wasn't like he wasn't being alerted to that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the BBC Passion was really good as well, and I think you probably undersell your own role in that as a historical consultant there, because I know you were kind of heavily involved in that as well, and I think
I did one of the things
it did.
I still feel so proud of being involved with. In fact, I think the first time that we met was at the premiere of The Passion. Is that
It
right?
was, yeah, that's right, yeah. It was.
Yeah, listeners won't know that we were both there in London for this glitzy premiere. It's the only time I've ever been to something like that before.
Yeah,
With
same here.
and we even got to meet Robert Powell, which was quite
Yeah,
exciting. I had to get some Dutch courage. There was quite a lot of booze around, and confess that helped to get bold enough to be able to sidle across the room to
yeah.
talk.
We
To
kind of
talk to
nudged
him.
each other in that
Yeah,
direction, didn't we?
that's right. Yes,
And I was
don't need.
I was quite happy because you could go out with your. I felt I could kind of come in the slipstream of your. I was the historical consultant on this play,
Yeah, well, I was
this
lucky because
production.
because I'd been at the front with
Yeah,
the Jesus, who's Joseph Mauler and
mm,
Frank Deasy and Nigel Stafford Clark and the director Michael Offer. So I'd actually been
yeah.
there at the front, so people would have known my face. But I don't know. I felt embarrassed though ever since then about one of the things I asked Robert Powell, and I don't know if you
I
remember
can't
this,
remember.
but I said something so stupid, and now that but what I said was because I don't think I really had any idea what we were actually going to talk to him about. I
No.
just wanted to meet him, so
Yeah.
I found myself saying, I said, "Do you and all the other Jesuses ever get together?" And he says, "No, we don't actually." No, I said, "Oh, well, you should do like like the Doctor Who's, they get together sometimes." I said you could compare notes on, and he was very nice about it. Because one of the problems
I
about being a little
I
bit
thought that was funny.
starstruck.
I do remember you saying that now. I thought that was funny. I think you should be pleased.
Oh, okay, well, that's good. I don't feel so bad about it.
No.
So, okay, we've done worst Jesus film or Bible film for you.
Yeah.
It's very. I get asked this question all the time. What's your favorite? And I always find it extremely difficult to answer. But I'm not the one answering. You are. So, what's your favorite Bible film?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways, if I had a good answer to that question, then I probably wouldn't have had to write the book.
Oh, excellent! But that's
Which
a good
is,
answer in itself. I
yeah,
like that.
I've used that before. But
Yes, that's good.
but
It's
but
good.
it is also like it is also a genuine thing. So I've been asked for a few
Hmm.
things to kind of name a few of the good ones, and it partly could vary on any given day, and depending what I'm trying to do and what I'm looking for. I think I really like I mean, the kind of Pasolini's Il Vangelo Secondo Matteo, the Gospel according to St Matthew, is probably the kind of the film lover's favorite, and I really enjoy the soundtrack. Is just superb.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful.
The photography is amazing. We were trying at one stage to get it. I've been talking to the local art house cinema in Leicester
Mm.
um, about doing a kind of film to tie with the book and doing an introduction for it. And at one stage, it looked like we were going to do that, which I was really excited about, and then it hasn't happened, which is a bit disappointing.
Yeah, that would be
But
brilliant. Yeah.
yeah, I think we're going to do Jesus Christ Superstar now. So
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
instead,
When
so
that's
I
got a
thought you'd be pleased about that. Because I
yeah,
know
well, it's got a
you love that
50th
one.
anniversary, hasn't it? And
Yeah,
the 50th anniversary of the film will be next year as well, and 50th
yeah,
anniversary of
yeah,
the stage show at the moment. So that would be an ideal choice in many ways.
yeah, yeah. So that one is always one of those that yeah is always kind of there or thereabouts. But there's just so many good ones, and
Mm.
I mean I guess I suppose the ones I really like, or perhaps the most general approach I really like, is something that interrogates the text and
Hmm.
asks the difficult questions, and perhaps it does the kind of Old Testament ones do that more than some of the Gospels. I mean, I suppose films like Life of Brian, for example, do that
Hmm.
with the New Testament, and that always makes me laugh, although I have some reservations about it.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
Another
same.
one that does that with Jesus films is, I think you mentioned it already, the BBC Son of Man. I do like the BBC.
Oh, I think I was mentioning the South African Son of Man.
Oh,
but,
yeah,
but
sorry.
But the
Yeah,
BBC
I like
Son
that
of
one as
Man.
well.
Yeah, I do. The BBC Son of Man, Dennis Potter is an astonishing piece of work. It's terribly dated in all sorts of ways, but it is a brilliant piece of work.
It is, yeah. I mean, Colin Blakely's delivery is fantastic. There's a very hench-looking St. Peter in there as well, played by Brian Blessed.
Yes, marvelous.
And yeah, but that's a good one. In terms of more recent films, I really liked Aronofsky's Noah. If I can stray into Hebrew Bible territory for a moment, but I think I thought that was. I mean, partly it was directed by a Jewish director, albeit a kind of non-practicing, as far as I'm aware. But it also kind of got Noah's this story that the level that most people interact with it now in the kind of Western world tends to be with a kind of like nicely crafted boat and a few twee animals, and you give it to your kids as a story. But actually, the biblical story is incredibly dark, because God basically wipes out everyone except 8 people.
Yeah,
and
it's a really
there's also this
film.
bit. And there's also this bit just before where you kind of get these beings from heaven coming down and impregnating these. And I think what I like about the film is it gets that sense of the unusual, the kind of the strangeness of it and the strangeness of the text, and it gets the moral problems of the text, really. And it actually really kind of wrestles with those, and the way kind of Noah kind of goes down this kind of Abraham path in terms of, should he kill his grandson and doom humanity or not? And it's very interestingly put together. So that's a recent one I like.
Yeah, good answer. And it has Emma Watson in it too.
Yeah. And Jennifer Connelly.
Right,
well.
Is that right?
So,
I've forgotten that.
Yeah. So it has and Anthony Hopkins as well. So it has a good old
fantastic
good old cast.
So
there's a lot that I really like.
It's nice to be ending our conversation on the upbeat of some stuff that we like, because one of the things about talking about Bible films is that quite often it's easy to dwell on the problems and negatives, and we have looked at some of that. So it's nice to sort of end on a positive note.
I was going to say I tried very much to do that in the book as well. I think because most people encounter film criticism within newspapers where they're telling you there's these 5 films. This is the best one, this is the worst one, then people think that is the way that film criticism should always be.
Right.
And I kind of felt that actually, that's actually should really only be a small chunk of writing about film for me. A much more interesting one is that kind of side thing that brings out the good things about the film and talks about, and kind of talks about those and the kind of things that are going on in it. And so I'm sure I'm kinder to a lot of these films than a lot of people would be when they were writing about them in newspapers, because I've tried to kind of emphasize what I think the film does well and what the interesting questions are, rather than kind of, it's very, it's like it can be like shooting fish in a barrel with these films. It's very, if you decide you want to sneer at a Bible film, then it's very easy just to rip everything apart. But I think most films are like that.
Exactly.
So I have tried to kind of like draw on, okay, what are the positives you can take from this film if you're interested in the subject and you're interested enough to watch it.
So Matt, greatly appreciate your spending some time to chat to us about
thank you for having
Bible
me
films. The book is excellent. It's called 100 Bible Films, and it's produced by the BFI, the British Film Institute.
That's right, yeah.
That's right, that's what BFI stands for, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And I strongly recommend it. Thanks so much, Matt, for a very enjoyable conversation, and I look forward to crossing paths again before too long, I hope.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Thank you for listening.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Matthew Page. I certainly did. You can find his excellent new book, 100 Bible Films, out now in all good bookshops. It's published by the British Film Institute, and you can find him also at the Bible Films blog at biblefilms.blogspot.com. Well, it's good to have your company again for the NT Pod. I'll be back again soon, I hope. You can find me on the web at podacre.blogspot.com. You can look out for me at markgoodacre.org, and you can follow this podcast on Twitter and on Facebook. Always great to have your company. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye-bye.